In Silicon Valley, intense optimism rewards big ideas. Software developers regularly launch unfinished products, gather user data, and patch the flaws later. Fake it until you make it is a widely accepted business strategy. Elizabeth Holmes absorbed this culture early. In 2003, at just 19 years old, she dropped out of Stanford to build a company of her own. She pitched a device small enough to sit on a doctor's desk. According to her pitch deck, this machine, called the Edison, would perform hundreds of complex laboratory tests without requiring patients to endure painful intravenous needles. Instead, she claimed all of those diagnostics could be run using just one single drop of blood. Investors wanted the next visionary, and Holmes gave them exactly what they were looking for. She spoke with intense, calculated confidence and wore a black turtleneck every day, directly mirroring the aesthetics of Steve Jobs. She took a complex, highly regulated biological tool and marketed it using the sleek, frictionless messaging of a consumer app. This chart illustrates the financial disconnect that followed. The top line shows Theranos' valuation climbing to $9 billion over a decade. The flat line at the bottom represents the amount of peer-reviewed medical data they published in that same timeframe: 0. The capital fueling that valuation came from some of the most influential political and business elites in the country, almost none of whom had a background in medical pathology. Former Secretary of State George Shultz joined the board, providing immediate credibility and insulating the startup from early skepticism. He was joined by top military officials like General James Mattis, adding an aura of strict discipline and national security importance to the company's image. Media tycoons like Rupert Murdoch poured in capital. Major magazines quickly followed suit, placing Holmes on their covers and crowning her the youngest self-made female billionaire. Holmes engineered a closed, self-sustaining loop. High-profile investments generated glowing press, and that press attracted even more high-profile investments, allowing Theranos to completely bypass the scientific method. Inside the company headquarters, the physical reality was drastically different. The Edison machines regularly failed to produce reliable results, spitting out wildly inconsistent readings on basic, standard medical tests. Software bugs can be patched overnight with new code. Human blood is bound by the strict laws of chemistry and physics, and it refuses to bend to a charismatic presentation. To maintain the illusion, the company began secretly analyzing patient samples on standard, commercially available laboratory equipment purchased from their competitors. Management enforced extreme paranoia to hide this practice. Employees were confined to isolated teams, forbidden from discussing their work, and forced to sign confidentiality agreements. The public was continually promised a flawless future for healthcare. Meanwhile, internal engineering teams were staring at chaotic, error-ridden data that pointed to absolute systemic failure. Holmes could not hack human biology, so she chose to manipulate the truth. She crossed a distinct line, moving from ambitious tech optimism to active medical endangerment. The facade eventually cracked because everyday patients were relying on these flawed results to make medical decisions. Employees like Tyler Schultz and Erica Challa recognized the immediate danger. They raised concerns about the inaccurate data to upper management. In response, they faced silence, internal intimidation, and threats of total legal ruin. Realizing the internal avenues were closed, they made the difficult choice to risk their careers, and in Schultz's case, his relationship with his own grandfather on the board, by taking their evidence outside the company. Their warnings reached John Carreyrou, an investigative journalist at the Wall Street Journal, who began a meticulous examination of the company in 2015. Carreyrou systematically dismantled Theranos. He cross-referenced the company's bold public statements with the confidential internal documents and technical readouts provided by the whistleblowers. Corporate secrecy structures are powerful when protecting venture capital, but they shatter rapidly when employees realize human lives are on the line. Following the publication of the journal's exposé, the fallout was swift. The FDA launched investigations, federal prosecutors stepped in, and major business partners terminated their contracts. By 2018, the company ceased operations entirely. The $9 billion valuation evaporated to zero, and investors lost hundreds of millions. In January 2022, a jury found Elizabeth Holmes guilty of multiple counts of fraud. She was sentenced to more than 11 years in federal prison. The justice system refused to accept her defense that she was simply a startup founder trying to pivot through technical difficulties. They punished her actions as deliberate, calculated deception. Launching an unfinished social network might result in a poor user experience. Launching an unfinished medical device results in catastrophic real-world harm. Theranos forced a permanent lesson upon the investment world. A famous board of directors and a charismatic founder can never substitute for hard, peer-reviewed evidence. Any technology claiming to disrupt a foundational industry requires rigorous, skeptical scrutiny before it ever touches the public. True scientific breakthroughs welcome tough questions. Stories and aesthetics can attract billions of dollars, but only verifiable truth builds lasting success.